The present middle passive indicative forms can also be translated in the middle voice. And there are three kinds or types of middle voice usage that I'll be going over here. And we'll begin with the most easily understandable types of middle voice, but also the most easily understandable is the less frequent, so you don't see it as often. So going backwards then, number 3, is the reflexive middle. And a good example of this is ha Judas aphangetai. Judas, either, if we translate this as the passive, is hanged, Judas is hanged, but when we look at the context of the gospel passage that talks about the death of Judas, Judas was alone. So we know that the passive voice is not the correct construction, but rather we should translate aphangetai as Judas hangs himself. Judas hangs himself. And that's an example where the subject, Judas, does the action, but the action also falls back upon the subject. And that's the most easily understandable use of the middle voice, but this is the least frequent. You hardly ever see this use used in the New Testament, so the least frequent form. Far more frequent, and therefore we often, if we're going to translate something in a middle way, use this form, is what we call the intensive middle. And the intensive middle, it's the use of the middle voice where, rather than focusing on the verb used in the sentence, you use the middle voice to show that what's under emphasis is the fact that of the subject. So the subject's being emphasized in the sentence, not so much the verb. So in this sentence, ha Christos sozetai kai kaletai hemas, Christ saves and calls us, rather than the verbs being emphasized. What's being emphasized in the sentence is not the saving or calling. Instead, because the middle voice is used for these verbs, what's being emphasized is actually the subject. The most important thing about the sentence is that it's Christ. Christ saves and calls us. Now, how do we show that the subject is emphasized in our English translation? In Greek, we can show that the subject is emphasized by using the middle voice. But in English, we don't have a middle voice equivalent. So artificially, what we've done is we've inserted the word himself. And we translated this as Christ himself saves and calls us. The word himself, this pronoun, is not really in the sentence, but we're translating the middle voice sozetai and the middle voice kaletai as an intensive middle, where we are showing that Christ is what's being emphasized in the sentence. The subject is being emphasized, and the way we show this in English is we use the intensive pronoun himself to emphasize the subject. So this is an example of what we call the intensive middle, and this is far more frequent. You're far more likely to see the use of the intensive middle used in a Greek sentence in the New Testament than you are with the reflexive middle. And finally, one of the most far more frequent use of the middle voice is what we call the deponent use of the middle voice. In fact, 75% of the middle forms in the New Testaments are deponent. And what a deponent verb is, it's a verb whose morphological form, the form that you see the verb being used in the sentence, is in a middle passive construction, but whose meaning is in the active voice. So this sentence, there's a lot here going on, so let me try to explain. And let's do this with an example. So here's the word irkamai. Irkamai is a very common deponent verb. It's something that you're going to be seeing frequently throughout Greek 1 and as you read the New Testament. Irkamai means I come. And what you notice is that this is the lexical form. And the lexical form here doesn't end with typically what we think would be an omega, like luo. And the reason why it doesn't end with an omega, like luo, is because whatever active forms urkamai originally might have had, maybe in the classical Greek period, for example, those forms are now lost. And in Koine Greek, the only forms that exist for this verb are in the middle or passive voice construction. And so because there's an absence of the active forms, the lexical form is actually ending in a passive voice construction. So this is the present middle indicative, first person singular, urkamai, which means I come. So a lot of times the deponent verbs are verbs that have in form and in the middle voice suffix, but their meaning or the way they translate is that you translate it actively. And you can't, so urkamai means I come or I go. And if you think about it, you can't really say I go in the passive voice. You can't say I is gone. That makes no sense. So instead, the middle forms are used for all the forms of the present tense, and you would translate this actively. So if you have urkamai, it's I am coming, I am going. If you have urke, iota subscript, that's you are coming, you are going. If you have urketai, that's he, she, it is coming, he, she, it is going, and so on. You'll understand how to translate deponent verbs more readily as you get practice in it in your homework. That concludes the grammar lesson for our module, but here we want to introduce some irregular verbs that look very similar to the verbs that you've learned so far in form, like luo or urkatai, for an example of a deponent verb. But nevertheless, they're different because instead of using the connecting vowel, so the connecting vowel is usually the omicron or epsilon. Instead of using the connecting vowel, it actually uses a different vowel. And in this case, that different vowel is alpha for the verb oida in the active voice, and it's alpha for the verb dynamai in the middle voice. So let me go over some examples. So oida means I am knowing. And this verb here, notice that instead of ending in an omega, it ends with an alpha. And then, so instead of omega, it's an alpha. Instead of an epsilon iota sigma, as we normally would think for the present active tense, it uses the alpha instead of this diphthong. So the forms or the suffixes are going to be very familiar to you. And generally speaking, the difference is that the connecting vowel has been substituted with the alpha, and then the regular suffix ending is attached onto it. So to say I know or I am knowing, it's oida. To say you know or you are knowing, it's oidas. To say he, she, it knows, instead of the a, it's using just the epsilon. So this is a little bit different. It does this so it can distinguish its form from the first person singular. If it uses an alpha, then it'll look exactly the same. And because this is a short vowel, you also have a movable nu. So this is the one form that you might not be expecting. And so oiden or oide is how you say he, she, it knows. And that's distinguished from oida, which is I'm knowing. And then we see the alpha being used to connect with the suffix for the rest of the form. So we are knowing or we know is oidamen. You all are knowing is oidate. And they are knowing is oidasen or oidasi. For the next word, dynamai, which means I am able to, or I can, This is a deponent verb because its lexical form ends in a my, not an omega. So you don't see the omega here, you see the my. That's a good signal that this is a deponent verb. So you will translate these actively even though they have middle forms. And again, instead of using the regular connecting vowel omicron or epsilon, that's not being used. The vowel alpha is used to connect the stem plus the alpha plus the suffix. So if we look at the forms of dynamai, to say I'm able or I can, it's dynamai. To say you are able, it's dune. And what's interesting is that you see two forms. Because the vowel that connects the stem dun with the suffix psi is not an epsilon. It's not a short vowel, but instead it's alpha. You can actually form dunasai. That's one form of you are able, but you also see dune with iota subscript. You actually see both forms used in the New Testament. Both have a different form, but they mean exactly the same thing. You are able. Dunatai, for the third person singular, is he, she, it is able. For the first person plural, dunamitha, we are able. For you all are able is dunaste, and they are able is dunantai. So let's say this again, one more time. Dunamai, dune, or dunasai, dunatai, dunamitha, dunaste, dunantai. And those are the forms for these two irregular verbs. Please memorize them. And lastly, just a friendly reminder that because we skipped chapter 17, you have a modified homework. So please use the modified homework that's in your study guide. Print it out, do all your homework on the modified homework sheet, scan it, and then upload it to Canvas to submit it. And notice that you also have a modified vocabulary list. You are to learn all of chapter 18 vocabulary, and also part of chapter 17. One of the things that we'll do is we'll learn all of chapter 17 vocabulary, but we'll tackle some of the vocabulary for this module and the rest of chapter 17 vocabulary for the next module. So remember that chapter 18, all of its vocabulary you're responsible for, and just these words for chapter 17. And with that, our module is concluded.